Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, James and Cable, and I have again with me David Kirkpatrick, and we're going to talk about something a little bit different. But before we get into that, David, how you doing?
I'm doing great. You?
Good. We, of course, recording this, and there's snow outside, and it's a nice wintry weather, full of NTI days and messy roads. So when you hear this, though, exactly. So when you hear this, though, hopefully there's sunshine and rainbows, because a good Kentucky day. But anyway, we're talking about Daniel Boone. We're going to talk about Daniel Boone a little bit, not the War of 1812, which you've been on here plenty of episodes for, but Daniel Boone. What does Daniel Boone mean to Kentucky? Quickly, in a summarized version.
I think if Kentucky had an ambassador to the world, it's Daniel Boone. You know, it's been that way for the 1700s forward. Everybody knows the name, and whether what they know about him is true or not, they know who he is. They know he's from Kentucky. And even though he never wore a coonskin cap, you will not find anything more Kentucky than a picture of Daniel Boone and his deerskin buckskins and a coonskin cap.
There you go. And we there's a lot. I'll go and show this one up here of old Daniel Boone. That one, he looks a bit more formal, quite prominent, very good painting. I doubt he was looking that smooth in the wilderness. There's plenty of stories about him in the wilderness, running around naked or just full beard. What you expect of a wilderness man, or maybe
Rebecca
a frontiersman.
Yeah, his wife does at one point. So that's tough living out there.
It is. But yeah, I mean, we can get into it. We'll get into many discussions or many, I guess, topics. Talking about the legacy of Daniel Boone, but him getting into Kentucky. But we're trying to divide it up here. Kind of Daniel Boone pre-Kentucky, because there's a lot about Daniel Boone before he even got to Kentucky. I mean, there's so much about his life, his father, his family in general. So plenty to talk about. So best place to get started is probably his father, Squire Boone Sr.
Right.
He has a younger brother named Squire Boone, and that can be a little confusing. But Squire Boone Sr. was Daniel's father, And he had a bit of an interesting background as well, being a Quaker, correct?
Right. Yeah, he was a first generation American too. The grandfather had sent the family over, and they settled in Pennsylvania, obviously, and became Quakers, and for years were pretty prominent in the community. Did really, really well. And I think all biographies about Boone spend a lot of time on this period because that kind of makes the man. As a young guy, he's born in the backwoods of Pennsylvania. He's whittled the war club, by the age of 10, which seems counterintuitive to Quakerism, and so he's getting this backwoods view, but also this very calm, very Quaker outlook on life that made him different than a lot of other guys.
Now, and I've talked about this, and what is the difference? I mean, what was the big Quaker, I guess, mentality overall? What differs it from, say, what would you say, Presbyterian? Is that be what's the word? Is that the one I'm looking for? I mean, Catholic,
Close.
obviously, there's a bit of a difference. I'm trying to think of those first settlers that came and their kind of religious background.
Right. Of course, Virginia is very Anglican. They're very Church of England. A lot of Scottish settlers are Presbyterian, as you mentioned. And of course, you've got, Irish Catholics, and there's some English Catholics who flee that persecution as well. Then you got the Puritans up in New England. But
Right.
the Quakers are sort of middle ground folks. William Penn and the people who settled Pennsylvania, they just want people to come. And if you're willing to agree to a few basic tenets, Christian doctrines, everything else is sort of up to you. And I think it's that viewpoint that makes Boone more accepting later in life, But there were some requirements. You had to marry within the Quaker community. You had to obey a few of the rules. It was very communal in a sense. Yeah. And if there was not maybe a hierarchy, you didn't have all the bishops and things like you're going to in the Church of England. But you had to obey the rules of the community. And of course, that later is what trips up Squire Sr. Well, not really his mistakes, I guess, but the kids' mistakes.
Because Daniel, so I don't know, I can't think of how many brothers and sisters he had total, but he had quite a bit. But do you remember right off the top of your head? I was thinking like 13 or something, but maybe more than that.
Yeah, I don't know. That sounds right though. Yeah.
But so one of his brothers married somebody outside the Quaker faith, and that was kind of a strike against the Boone family. Right. And I can't remember. There was another incident that happened as well. Needless to say, Squire Boone Sr. says, "You know what, guys? I'm headed out." And he heads to North Carolina. Kind of a big deal, I guess, in the sense that this is kind of the first settlement of Daniel Boone that really kind of lasts for, a long time. He meets his wife there and so forth. But the Yadkin Valley, he moves there with Squire Boone Sr. moves there. And then comes along, of course, Daniel and the rest of the family. And then, who else is in that area but Rebecca Boone, which would be Daniel Boone's future wife. I did a video about her, and it's one of those things, like, just to take a moment to speak on her in general. Daniel Boone, of course, gets a lot of credit for many things, but you can't forget Rebecca Boone, who stayed home and took care of the kids. They had 11 kids, I believe, total. So she deserves quite a bit of credit as well. It's one of those things that doing a video about Daniel Boone's wife is a little bit more difficult because not as much is out there. Nobody wrote a biography about Rebecca Boone,
right.
So you kind of have to go with what is given on the other side, and so forth. Now, was she Quaker as well, or was I just thinking about that?
I don't believe so, but now I could be wrong in that. But yeah, I don't believe she was. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the thing about her too, when you look at Frontier Women, it highlights how long or how often the husbands were away from home. Boone goes to get salt, and even if the trip, which we'll talk about later, even if that trip goes according to plan, you've got to boil down, dozens and dozens of gallons of water. You've got to transport that back. So you're not going to Walmart to pick up salt for the food, to secure things. You're going on a several week trip. And, the frequency that he was gone, that she kept things running at home with all the kids is amazing.
It is. And I mean, it's kind of mind blowing to think how much she had to deal with at home. And as you said, many of Daniel Boone's trips took a long time. I think Daniel was 15. He was 15 when they first moved there in the Yadkin Valley, which Rowan County, North Carolina, I believe is where it's at. And he actually started his own hunting business because Daniel Boone was a man of the wild at a very young age. You talked about him at the age of 10. Whittling his hunting supplies. But he got the bug early, I guess, if you want to say that. He was very in tune or very focused on being outdoors. He loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something special about that area too, and I always find it odd because if you look at where Boone settles, just 2 hours west by car is where James Harrod and most of his men grew up, and then if you go south about an hour, into Maryland, that's where Isaac Shelby's from. So that you have all these frontiersmen who are right there together. There's something about growing up there because you had the benefits of the East, but you were westward-facing people. You were comfortable in the woods. You're right. He got it at a young age, and even when they moved, that doesn't leave them. And it surprises me that the dad moves as far as he does, the Squire Senior. Why not go to Maryland? Why not go to Virginia? He does end up living in Virginia a little later. But what made you travel to North Carolina? That's a big trip.
Now that's a long drive. Walk, horseback. They're not driving anywhere. But I did not put that together. You were very right. That's right where James Harrod, Isaac Shelby, all right within that area. Man, my mind is blown for the moment. I'm sitting there thinking, where was Benjamin Logan? Where was Benjamin Logan at?
Good question. I'm gonna have to check that now.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm pretty sure he was born in Virginia, but how close was he?
Right.
Yeah. That's a side note. My personal favorite, frontiersman Benjamin Logan.
Right.
I
Good
assume
choice,
I assume Harrod would be your guy, or
yeah, I have to say, I know that sounds kind of cliche, but yeah, I'm a big fan of James Harrod. So.
Yeah. Now Simon Kenton. Thing is, and this is off the topic a little bit, but we'll talk about Simon Kenton a little bit later too. But Simon Kenton is probably the one I'm most intrigued about, the one I think is most fascinating and most interesting. Mainly because he really didn't. Well, he did set up a station and so forth, but he's not really known for a fort. But he did so many crazy things and is responsible for settling Kentucky. But anyway, personal Benjamin Logan, just because I've grown up there or grown up so close to him my entire life, or his area my entire life. So anyway, back to Boone. So he's as we said, he's kind of loves outdoors. He loves being chasing game. And doing those sorts of things, hunting, fishing, all that. He's quoted to saying that if he can see the smoke from somebody else's house, it's time to move. Such an isolated kind of guy. He wanted to be away from it all and in the wilderness. So a lot of people know of his expeditions, his exploring, his frontiersmanish activities, but he was also a soldier, and he took place in Braddock's War, which was a bit of a big deal. Featured George Washington, and this was kind of the set off for the French and Indian War, correct?
Yeah, they're marching northward to engage the French, and who have laid claim to Fort Pitt in the Ohio Valley. And Boone and his guys, they're backwoodsmen. Everyone has to serve in the militia. But what you try to do is you try to get people jobs they're good at. So, they're wagoneers. They're in the background. They're looking at the terrain and stuff. But another, example of, despite being a big place and having a few million folks at this point, how many iconic people end up in the same place. So like you mentioned, George Washington's with Braddock at the front of this thing. and Boone and his backwoodsmen are in the back. And he would have witnessed the defeat and probably narrowly escaped with his life as well. Probably not in the thick of it because his job was in the rear echelon. But saw a lot of bloodshed. At a very young age. He's an adult at this point, but still early in his career.
It is when you think about, that here we are talking about Daniel Boone, a big frontiersman of Kentucky, and he was fighting alongside, well, maybe not alongside, but he was fighting under the command of the first president of the United States. So pretty cool connection. Not to say Daniel Boone had a big role or a big part of it, but he was there,
Oh, yes.
Doing what he needed to do.
Right.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe he escaped because that battle did not go well. I don't believe for America, did it? They kind of saw it coming.
And to the credit of the Americans, they warned the British. Bright red coats in a forest, marching with fife and drum, that kind of thing. Really not a good idea. The French had engaged Indian allies who were hiding behind trees and that kind of thing. And they get the British force so discombobulated. So it's primarily British regulars, but some American militia, that the British end up firing each other. And Washington is famously credited for riding in between them, trying to break it up. But it's a huge defeat. Braddock gets killed. He ends up ceding command to Washington. And the Americans and the British kind of turn tail and, return in defeat. Yeah.
to put it as simple as it is, and they run. One thing that I remember reading was Daniel Bush. He escaped the ambush on horseback, or Daniel Boone escaped the ambush on horseback. So he was there. He did what he had to do. Now when he came back, and this we kind of jumped the gun a little bit. He does marry Rebecca in 1756, and they have 10 children. I'm sorry, I said 11 earlier, but 10 children. Daniel Boone, good quote from Daniel Boone is, "A good gun, a good horse, and a good wife is all you need." And like we said before, I believe he definitely hit that, or definitely. I probably shouldn't say definitely hit that.
I understand what you mean. He covered all the bases. He had someone that would stick with him. So that would not have been an easy job to be Rebecca Boone.
No. She deserves just as much credit as anybody else. But he goes into Kentucky, but he actually goes all the way to Florida as well, and which is kind of mind-boggling at the time. But I want to bring up his son James. His son James is getting of the age, and this is, Boone does stay at home, I guess, for the first little bit of their marriage. He doesn't. I remember, we're all over the place. I forgot all about the book we've been reading, Blood and Treasure, the book about Daniel Boone. It's a really good one. If you want to go to audibletrial.com or audibletrial.com/KYHistoryPod, you can get on Audible for free. Get Audible for the first month. But it's a really good book. You should check it out. But anyway, that's our book plug. James is Daniel's one of Daniel's oldest sons, I believe, and he is constantly wanting to go with his father on these expeditions, these hunts. But Daniel and Squire, I believe, go to Florida, and not so happy with Florida. What's the problem with Florida that they seem to have?
I think it's radically different for them. And of course, it's Spanish territory. So that's something to keep in mind. But or at that time, maybe in British at that point. I don't know. It switches hands so often. But he doesn't spend much time down there, and they make their way back. So it's not what he's looking for. But Boone kind of has to find something. He's got, as you said, a growing family, and he's also got mounting debts, which is a huge problem for people during this time. You're land rich, but cash poor, and as they wear out the land, you've kind of got to find alternatives. And for Boone, the love affair with Kentucky starts earlier because he meets John Finley when he's on the march to Braddock's defeat we talked about, and he begins hearing these tales of what exists over the mountains, and that sticks in his mind. I was going to say festers. That's probably not the word I'm looking for. It grows in his mind over time until he just has to see what Kentucky's like. And when you've got the pressures, the financial pressures, a good long hunt seems like a good way to settle it.
Yeah. And now, that's kind of the way it goes. Like you mentioned, he goes to Florida. Florida's real swampy. It's not the fertile bluegrass, the cane breaks, all that good stuff that he wants to, I guess, explore. I mean, he does. He has that itch to just
Mhm.
be in the wilderness and to be out exploring. And talking about John Finley, Daniel Boone was not the first European to come into Kentucky. There's Thomas Walker. Um, a few others. I had it on my tip of my Isaac something. I cannot think of what his name is. Um, he gets the itch, or he finally, I guess, begins to answer the itch. I guess I should say. Now, a lot of people will say that Daniel Boone came through Kentucky. I know it was probably taught in elementary school to me and you that he came through the Cumberland Gap.
Mhm.
That was his first big trip.
Right.
However, that is not the case. That is not the case. That is a big misconception. And that's okay. Misconceptions happen. But when was his first trip into Kentucky?
Let's see. He first comes to Kentucky. Oh, I'm blanking out on the date for that.
1767.
Okay. Yep.
So 1767. He comes to Kentucky, but he actually comes up the Big Sandy River.
Hmm.
So he comes up the Big Sandy River, which is in Pike County for everybody
Right.
who wants to know. Now he goes as far as Floyd County, which is right next to Pike County, obviously, and the Big Sandy River and all that stuff. That's his first venture into Kentucky. And if you think about North Carolina and how North Carolina, Virginia, and Kentucky kind of sit, that's a little closer in the sense of getting to the actual specific area of Kentucky as opposed to going down the south into the Cumberland Gap and so forth. That was his first trip, and that was his first trip, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's the first trip, and I guess it answers his call to the wild. He really enjoys what he sees. He sees it is very rich and fertile and so forth. And well, that's about it on that one, I guess. Now the Cherokee Wars, we didn't really talk about that much.
Right.
That was before or after the Braddocks? Was that after Braddock's
That's after.
defeat?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
We're getting this. Yeah,
is
getting
is
into
that?
was 1771, two,
Hmm. Hmm.
something like that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and when is the French and Indian War considered over?
Pontiac's Rebellion follows French and Indian War, so we're getting
Hmm.
into when is Pontiac defeated? 1760. Yeah, Pontiac starts 1763, and it doesn't last too terribly long after that. So by
Hmm.
1760, 1765, things have calmed down, and
Hmm.
they're kind of going back to normal. The British had already, and the French had already kind of ceased hostilities when Pontiac begins. He's determined to fight to the bitter end. So yeah, it's not terribly long after that Boone really begins his trips into Kentucky. So it's still a pretty
Yeah,
dangerous time.
yeah. I mean, especially as far as you know, Native American presence in the area, um, and so forth. Um, Cherokee Wars after that, that kind of fires up. And when you think about, and by no means do I know um, all there is to know about Native Americans and their locations, but the Cherokee typically were in the eastern part of Kentucky, the western part of North Carolina, and Virginia, kind of that part of the Appalachian Mountains. So you could tell Boone is right there in the midst of all this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. There are two
so
tribes that really hold a lot of strategic value when it comes to settling Kentucky. Like you said, you got the Cherokee down there in the southeast, and so they're really blocking access to the Cumberland Gap. As early as his march with Finley, there's talk about maybe a path or something in that region. It's kind of vague, but
mhm.
hostilities with the Cherokee are part of the problem. And you can't come down the Ohio if there are issues with the Shawnee. So, both
Yep.
of those things kind of have to resolve themselves. And you're right, the Cherokee War, when that comes to a close, and it's not terribly long, uh, you know, Boone really begins his march that direction. And of course, he has, some encouragement after a few of those long hunts because of Richard Henderson. So, that helps quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, and now, and two, that the whole conflict with Native Americans is a big issue. The King of England had decreed as well that no settlers would settle across the Appalachian Mountains.
Yeah.
That did not hold. That did not last. Just the typical growth of the colonies, and as you said, people that were land rich but poor,
Right.
they had to they had to they had to survive for their families. And Boone being one of those who also enjoyed hunting, these big expeditions are starting to be planned and in order to provide and so forth. You think about how farming obviously was a big deal for the colonists, but even those bigger towns, they're starting to get more and more populated. And as those cities get populated, the population then spreads out. As those people spread out, it's just a continuous cycle of migration, I guess would be the
Oh,
best way
yes.
to say it. Um, so yeah, he starts. He goes in 1767, like we said, he goes into Kentucky through the Big Sandy and so forth, and then he uh, in May 1769, Boone leads an expedition with John Finley and four other men to discover the Cumberland Gap, and
Right.
that was kind of a big deal. Obviously, of course, they moved through there uh, and discover way, I guess their wildest dreams, I guess in their sense.
Yeah. And, you kind of, the King of England, you almost owe him a debt of gratitude as an American because you mentioned the line that he drew, the Proclamation of 1763. The British are serious. And it's no coincidence that the problem with Pontiac starts in 1763, and then we've got the proclamation that year. The British really want to show the Indians that they're not going to let settlers out there. And so if you're a settler, the Ohio River was at least sometimes patrolled by the British. So
Mhm.
you've got to find a new way in. And, so we appreciate that. What is the saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. They needed a new route. They found a new route. And like you said earlier, Boone had already had trips kind of over the mountains into Pike County in that area. And it's neat for hunting, not handy when you're bringing families, in wagons. And so the gap was such a necessity because of that.
Yeah, and which the Cumberland Gap, as we said before, discovered by Thomas Walker, named after the Duke of Cumberland and all that. Cumberland River, the same. Um, Side notes there, but he goes over, finds. I guess I should say makes the trail in a way. You know,
Mhm.
um, Oftentimes these explorers or frontiersmen would make a trail. If not, they would find a trail that most likely was already kind of paved by Native Americans and so forth. One thing, because you got the Wilderness Trail, you got the Warriors Path, you kind of have all these um, trails. I sometimes get them all mixed up. Um, do you get a better hold on them as far
Yeah,
as?
the Warriors path a little bit because it seems so integral. It leads through kind of through the gap, but then into eastern Kentucky, north into Ohio. So if you're a Shawnee or a Cherokee or a Catawba, and you're trying to make that connection, that is the main artery north to south. And so it's common, when you come through the gap, to travel that a ways before you branch further west, into the bluegrass area. So yeah, that's probably the main one, and it's because of that path that later on Boone is able to anticipate where the Indians are taking captives and that kind of thing. So not to get ahead of ourselves, but yeah, that's the main one. And then there are so many buffalo paths and things that lead to salt licks, which it's no wonder that so many early settlers mention Big Bone Lick. They all end
Mhm.
up passing the same sort of landmarks because you're following these trails. So yeah, that's the
Yeah,
main one, north to south. And then if you could dogleg off that through Harrisburg and then up to what will become Louisville on the Ohio River, up to the Falls of the Ohio, as they called it. Those are
yeah,
your main two.
yeah, and that's kind of what they did. I mean, settlers for many years, decades, um, follow these paths. Boone, he, well, I guess we probably should. He makes multiple expeditions into Kentucky. I mean, he brings Squire, his younger brother, Squire Boone Jr. He brings him into along with these trips, and I say bring him on, as in if he's like, hey, little brother, come on. But really, Squire Boone, I mean, just for a little side thing, was just as important in many ways as Daniel Boone was. I mean, he was
Oh
along
yeah.
for many of the same expeditions as Daniel was on. I mean, he did many of the same things as far as like saving, or guiding people to Kentucky. Now, honestly, I can't think of, or I don't know of any times that he was actually captured. So I think he's got a leg up or two on his brother. I mean, he was never
Yeah.
captured.
Yeah, I know a fellow who lives in Shelby County, a historian there, and of course Squire ends up settling there for a little bit. And he says, I hope I don't offend any Boone fans in saying this. He said that Squire was the smarter of the two brothers because he retains his land, he becomes very wealthy before he moves on. He's never captured, so if you had to pick one of the two to hang out with, you're going to have more fun or more excitement with Daniel Boone, but you're going to be a lot safer with Squire.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh well. There's the whole river. Oh, sorry. What's it? Oh, it just left me. The is it the river? It's not the. It's the River Run massacre, or it's when they're all stationed at Squire Boone's station. A bunch of them leave to go to a station that's closer to Louisville, more fortified. Squire was sick, so his people stay home, and that was actually a blessing in disguise because all those people end up getting massacred. I can't remember what it might be, the Creek Run massacre or something like that. But
yeah,
I can't
you've
think of
got me
what it's
there.
called right off the bat. I know it. I probably mentioned it in a video at some point, but anyway, yeah, Squire Boone, very very important, just as important as Daniel Boone, of course. But yeah, never got captured, right along the whole time. But anyway, they make many expeditions into uh, uh, Kentucky, and it gets to the point that he actually does bring along his older son James.
Right.
And in 1773, they're on an expedition. Um, One of the things to think about, like the craziness about it is, they would go, kill animals, hunt for pelts, get all this stuff, and then sometimes they would get so much. Kentucky was so fertile that they couldn't transport it back,
Right.
um, which is very interesting. And think, man, it blows your mind to think how much wildlife and I guess resources just were thriving in Kentucky, that they had so
Mhm.
much they couldn't even bring it all back. Um, but needless to say, um, many of these trips, they would leave some, they would hide it and bury it, and then hopefully come back and get it on another trip. Sometimes they would even forget, though, where they buried it, or maybe some Native Americans found it and they just took it as well. Um,
Right.
but anyway, on this one expedition, they get a bit of an eerie feeling, thinking that they're being kind of that there are Native Americans in the area, but they brush it aside. Daniel sends his son James and a Callaway boy, I believe. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah, they send them back for supplies. They're
Mhm.
in reinforcements. Yeah, and so in their mind, they're going away from the danger in a sense. You're going back towards civilization and settlements, and it just doesn't end up that way.
And it's one of those brutal incidents that you hear about on the frontier. They're caught, they're killed and mutilated. In the book that we Blood and Treasure, it talks about um, how that Boone even went back after they had uh, buried the body and so forth, and kind of dug him up to make sure he hadn't been disturbed, and he could have he hardly could recognize him. I mean, obviously decay and so forth, but just the way
Yeah,
they mutilated him. Um,
yeah,
yeah, very go ahead.
yeah. You're right. Yeah, be fearful of wolves digging up the graves and eating them. They had buried them the best they could and then covered them with logs. And I mean, talk about you know the seeing that, and he reburies them wrapped in cloth. He individually wraps the folks that are killed, and so that's a tender side. You think of Boone as this big frontiersman, and I think we get Walt Disney syndrome sometimes. It was always happy and sunny, but man, what's something to deal with. And
yeah, and throughout his whole life, I mean, and that goes with all the frontiersmen that you can think of. I mean, they dealt with some serious tragedy just on the forefront,
Right.
I mean, survival. We think about survival today as, can I get to the grocery store before the snowstorm hits so I have enough bread for 2 or 3 days?
Right.
They were surviving as in, I have to have food or I'm going to die.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
However I'm going to get that food, either a plant or an animal is what I got to do to survive. And
the fact that so many of these people had similar experiences and then still continued forward, really speaks to the urgency of that.
Yeah, how they weren't discouraged and just like, you know what, I'm gonna go to Boston or I'm gonna go to Williamsburg and I'm gonna run a tavern and do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They just that goes to show to definitely the character or the passion that Daniel Boone and some of these other frontiersmen had of just wanting to explore and be out there in nature. But anyway, definitely a rough moment for Daniel Boone's life, the loss of his son, which would be traumatic for anybody losing their son or daughter, a child, I guess, in general.
We're going to stop right there with our discussion about Daniel Boone before he came to Kentucky. We want to thank David again for coming on, and thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you. The viewers, the listeners, we want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.